Hi, everyone. Today I'd like to introduce Greg Alden. He is the president and CEO of Diagnostic Biochips. He has a 25 plus year-long career optimizing data communications to solve big problems. This spans from early broadband internet, mobile communications, and now he brings the same expertise to problems associated with the data contained within the human brain. So, Greg, can you tell us your story? I'd love to hear a bit more about your background and what brought you to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So I started out my career, actually, this is going to date myself, but I got out of high school, went to college for one semester and decided it wasn't for me. And that led to getting a sales job in the local DC area in Virginia. And the customers I ended up calling on were the original internet service providers, UNet, Digex, and PSINet. And so I found myself in the middle of the internet Wild West and the glory days from the mid 90s all the way through till, geez, well, it's still going on today, I suppose. The first company I worked for ended up getting bought by Cisco Systems. And so I found myself in the world's biggest and leading networking company. And I stayed there for about oh, 10, 12 years after we got acquired. And then I joined a startup in the mobile industry. It was building out the packet core infrastructure for the broadband mobile data networks. This is when there was, less than 200,000 subscribers on, like, for example, Verizon Wireless's networks. It was very, very early on. That was a fun ride. And then I ended up leaving that to do software in the cloud. And then bless you, I started my own business doing some cloud infrastructure, distributed computing for network functions. And during that time, in the midst of that, in 2010, I actually got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease right before my 40th birthday. So I did sort of what everybody else probably does initially, is you do what your doctor tells you. If you just take the pills and you go on, try and go on your merry way. After about 4 or 5 years, I started to feel worse. My brain function was starting to decline cognitively and so on. And it messed my personality had changed quite a bit also. And so I actually decided in late 2015 to exit the industry entirely, go home, because I was up in Boston, living in Boston. My family was in DC. And take a couple of years off to get my brain sorted out, so to speak. So that's when I started looking at reading about neuroscience, really spending a lot more time with neurologists and just doing a lot of homework. At one point, I thought I would go and get my undergrad and try and get my PhD. I realized there's no way. I'm too old and not smart enough for that. So I made the decision that I was going to try and find a way to apply technology to large neuro problems. It was surprising to me is that how little we know about the human brain still, and even more so 10 years ago. And I just thought that there must be some way to help bridge the gap between all the research that's going on, all the drug development that's going on, but yet there's complete lack of progress. There's been no new pharmaceuticals really in the last 30, 40 years, but certainly for Parkinson's. The one I take was released in 1970, which is the year I was born. So just to give you an idea of how old and antiquated these are. So I thought maybe there's a way to apply technology to the problem, and specifically, if you could get the data out of the brain in such a way that you could do large scale analytics and regressions, and maybe get to find some of the reason why have these faulty circuit patterns. Fundamentally, to me, the brain is like a very, very complicated distributed computing and networking function or set of functions. And when things happen in that sort of construct, they propagate very quickly. So I figured if we could get the data out, get it into a usable format in large scale with global collaboration, that might help advance things. So that was kind of the idea. And that's kind of how I ended up at DVC, is through that whole process. That's the short version.
Yeah, I totally understand how that diagnosis can kind of make you a lot more interested in the neuroscience space. And I also agree with you in terms of the fact that the better that we handle and communicate and organize this data from the brain, the more likely we are to make new discoveries. And hopefully that those can lead to new therapeutics and new treatments and everything like that. And so I was wondering, maybe you could dive into a little bit more detail behind the story of like first when you discovered your interest in neuroscience and then how you actually ended up at Diagnostic Biochips specifically.
Sure. So obviously the getting Parkinson spurred my interest to start understanding what I was dealing with. So that's kind of when I started to literally read textbooks on neurology and neurophysiology and so on. And that led to a couple things. One is I realized that I had to take control of my own destiny as it relates to my health and my regimens and all that kind of stuff. And I looked for other areas where you could gain advantages by doing certain things. For example, exercise, and it has a very huge positive impact. Diet, nutrition, supplements, all that kind of stuff. So I spent a lot of time and energy. I mean, I was an athlete for most of my life, so it was easy for me to spend time and energy understanding how to do that better and more efficiently. And I started to just understand all the fragmented data that was out there, lots of it, but fragmented, lots of duplicative research, lots of things that are sort of hanging there, things that might add to another piece of research that make it more useful and so on. And I just kept going back to the lowest common denominator has got to be data, and the level of granularity of the data, of course, being relevant. So I wrote a little 2-pager, I'll call it, which is kind of my thesis for doing something I refer to as IoT for the brain, and that would be finding implantable devices that you could implant in the brain, and they would record the analog signals and data that comes out and convert it into bits, and then they could be used to analyze in pretty much any standard big data architecture these days. You couldn't have probably done this 5 years ago because the compute technology and the database technology wasn't far enough along yet to scale to the level you have to contemplate doing this. So with that, I went out and started looking for people that made this stuff, and lo and behold, the founder of DBC, turns out he lives 5 miles away from where I do. And I went in and had lunch with him one day and said, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing." And he goes, "Well, that's funny because that's what we're building." And so that sort of kicked the whole thing off. I committed a year of my time and for free to go work with them to see if they could commercialize what they had built and designed and developed out of the sort of NIH grant funded world, if you're familiar with that. And so we spent the next year productizing stuff, getting a better understanding of what customers want, and so on and so forth. And then we sort of relaunched the company in 2019, and I stayed on as CEO and have been there since. So that's kind of how I got from where I was to DBC. Brian Jameson, who's the founder, is very well known, very well respected guy in the electrophysiology space. Super guy, super smart. I mean, all the people in this domain are pretty smart, and not including myself. But it's been a lot of fun and very interesting for sure.
Well, you seem like a really smart guy to me, and I also totally agree with what you said about some of the infrastructure not being there for this data like maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm really excited that there's been a lot of innovation in terms of the data infrastructure and the cloud, as well as AI, and even innovation in terms of like the probes and such that we're putting into the research subject, the animals, or even the humans, the patients. And I think it's kind of an exciting time that all of this innovation is starting to coalesce and starting to happen right around the same time. And hopefully that leads to a bright future ahead for the space. So now I'll pass it off to Yuqing, and she's going to ask some additional questions about DBC and maybe about some of the details behind the company and what you guys are working on.
Sure. Yeah, take it easy on me. I'm not an engineer now.
Oh, but I am sure you still have so much of the same processes that apply all the time. Which brings me to one of the first questions, which is when you joined with the company, you did about a year of work. I assume working on, could I describe it as like translational, like clinical, or like commercialization of the product?
Yeah, it's more on the commercialization of the product and like the business model and whether you can make money doing this and how many customers were there, and what's the best way to go about selling to them, and trying to understand, because the basic research market, which is where we started, is very unique, the way it functions and does business and so on. So I really want to get a good understanding of that, because the thing with product businesses, which there aren't many of in neuro for a lot of reasons, is that you have to have repeatability. And the only way you get repeatability is not by having huge variances in what you're designing and building. And that's not the way that traditionally the basic research community operates. Not dissimilar to the world I came from in telecom infrastructure, where you had Bell Labs back in the old days, and they were inventing everything and patenting it, and then oftentimes they would license a lot of that technology out to people that are going to build products. You see a similar dynamic here, where you see these universities developing licensing offices that try, in the PIs and so on are all trying to solve problems and also potentially create additional IP value for the university. So it's kind of figuring out how to manage all that and navigate through all that while you're still trying to sell something that looks like, where at least the first unit looks something like the 10th unit, and so on, is really what I spent a lot of my time on. And understanding how these guys think, to the extent I could, and what's really important to them.
Speaking of understanding how like these experts think and like collaborating with different sources, I'm curious how the transition was between going from like a more engineering focused telecommunication position and going into all this market analysis. Was this already familiar to you, or did you have to pick it up on the fly?
So, it's interesting. So philosophically, I've been around for quite a while now. I always sort of intentionally try and act like the dumbest person in the room. And I say that in jest, but if you just listen, you'll learn a lot. And so I just listened a lot and absorbed a lot, and eventually learned how to ask reasonably intelligent questions. And if I didn't, they let me know I didn't. And so that helped me understand the neuro side of it a bit better. I already really understand, and this is a unique thing that we have, I think. I understand distributed cloud, scaling the cloud, big, huge networks with billions of endpoints, because that's what I did for 20 years. So I know how to build a software team, and how to build a hardware team. I know how to find CMs and outsourcers and all those people. I run finance, all this stuff that people don't think about: running finance, hiring salespeople, doing marketing, doing, all that kind of stuff to make a company go. Is a lot of times, it's oftentimes what the technical founding teams, when they're in the research mode, they don't think about that stuff. And so it was an advantage to have, and I give Brian a lot of credit for this, to bring me into an environment like that and say, here, go have at it. So that, we could go in and just hit, charge, you want to look a lot bigger than you are when you get started. I used to use the puffer fish analogy. If you ever seen one of those, where they're like this big, and then, when they get scared, they puff up to like 5 times the size. That's how we think. But yeah, so it was easier, because I understood once it's got into a data format, then it's like right in my domain. And the data in raw form doesn't look a whole heck of a lot different than wireless network data on a big wireless network. You still have endpoints with sending signals over frequencies that are powered, and you can record them and you can manipulate them and all that kind of stuff. So it's not entirely different. It's not the same, but it's not entirely different conceptually.
100%. And I definitely think the ability to, like you said, build a company and make sure, like, know how the company is supposed to run and build teams like that is incredibly important and supports your success now. Also, in addition to that, I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about diagnostic biochips and what the market looks like right now. Do you have any competitors that you're actively trying to beat in the market, as well as what specific products you are focusing on?
Sure. So, and there's a lot going on right now. I mean, you can feel and see the momentum that's going on in terms of fundraising and all these companies that are coming out and so on. So historically, we were in the traditional electrophysiology business. So that's microfab devices that you implant, either ECOG, EEG, or deep penetrating probes, whatever. We happen to be on the deep penetrating probes. That's what we stay focused. We have stayed focused on that. It was sort of some technology that was actually created at the University of Michigan, probably close to 20 years ago. And that's Brian, actually, that's where Brian got his PhD. That's where Fawn, they had his product strategy, got his PhD. So they came out of Ken Wise was the guy that invented the stuff. That was Brian's mentor, professor, or both. So that's where the technology originated. So today, you see a few different buckets of companies. One is the traditional guys, traditional EFIS folks. So that's like us, NeuroNexus, NeuroPixels to some extent is in that category, Plexus, people like that. The other domain, which really is not totally dissimilar, but it's a little bit different focus in terms of energy right now, is the BCI domain. And that's where you have like Neuralink, Paradromics, and BlackRock, for example. And fundamentally, they don't do entirely different things than we do. They're just coding the return path that you get to help you move an arm or leg, or get to do voice or whatever. We're focused on offloading a lot of data at scale to download and analyze for the purpose of finding faulty network patterns in the brain and trying to recreate them and figure out what caused them and so on. And then there's a whole bunch of new companies that are just popping up that are, I would call them material companies looking for an application for their material. So like the graphene stuff, for example, that was originated in Spain. There's a company that came out of Spain that's trying to sell graphene-based implants, and they're all saying the same thing. We're gonna solve all the neurodegenerative diseases with our material. And I'm like, no, So, I mean, I think you can't skip over the steps in this space. It's not like you can come in and go from 1 to 10. You actually have to go through 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10. It's just not that straightforward. So I think what the landscape looks like a year and 2 years from now could be quite a bit different. So you have to see, the most important thing you need to do is running a company is make sure you survive it.
That is very sage advice. And we've actually talked to a few of these materials focused people on this podcast before. So this is a very good other perspective to have as well. Could you actually, if you don't mind, you mentioned that, oh yeah, like, because of course some of these companies, they target new materials in terms of to solve like specific problems, but they're also promising like a lot. What do you think? You mentioned like there are steps in between. Like what are, apart from like having to keep a company afloat while you're doing this, what are some of the steps between, like, what is the step between coming up with an idea and bringing it to market?
That's a good question. And I have a friend who's a neurosurgeon who started a company like 5 or 6 years ago. And he comes from the complete opposite background as me. And we compare notes on the mistakes we made throughout those processes and the difference in our mistake categories. Mine being on the medical side, his being more on the business side. So I think it's important that you really think about the business side of this as early as you can. Because ultimately, if you want to scale something so lots of people can have the benefit of it and provide benefits to the broader humanity, if you will, you need to be able to build something that's sustainable. And I think oftentimes labs and research labs and academics tend to not think in those terms as soon as they should. And so then they get down the road some number of miles, and then they're like, wait a minute, how am I going to survive the next 24 months? Who do I sell this to? My 5 research friends or whomever that I partnered with, they can't take me to the next level. And then you go into this, the 5 stages of a traumatic experience, right? And then ultimately you accept the fact that you have to figure out how to run a company. And that's maybe you, it may not be you, but that's what you have to do. And I think that's where a lot of really potentially good technology dies on the vine, because they don't think about those problems. So I think one of the first things, as silly as it may sound, is one of the first things you should do is write a business plan when you come up with your technology. What problem are you solving? How big of a problem is it? Is your technology or your product defensible? Either via IP or your sales process, your partners, whatever it is. And can you do the math? I say this to everybody. Can you do the math on a big button calculator? I mean, one of those big kitty calculators. You need to be able, if you've got to pull your 10B out to figure out what the return is on your company, there isn't one. I mean, So I think those are the big things. There's, the devil's in the details, but what I see right now is a lot of companies have raised a lot of money. I have no idea who they're going to sell stuff to, and we've raised very little money, and we have 500 customers today all over the world, to all the top research institutions on the planet. Now our challenge is to figure out how to put that into a space that can really scale up, but the pieces are generally in place. So that's kind of what I would say. I don't know if I answered exactly what you asked me, but I think I got most of it.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. I think I was involved in a little bit of startup stuff before, and I was part of seminars where they told the startups we need to make sure that we are like customer centric. We are always communicating and knowing like what the customers actually want before you build a product. And sometimes that means like pivoting slightly, and that's what
Yeah.
should happen sometimes.
Sometimes you have to pivot. Sometimes you're always iterating.
Exactly.
Yeah. You never stop iterating.
I have a question though, because that kind of thinking is kind of counterintuitive, like you said, for academia people. A lot of the values in academia is more focused towards I'm going to make an improvement upon a technology that not necessarily is used as a product. How would you would you give any advice to like academics, for example, perhaps hoping that their device could be used in some real world setting? Like, should they attempt to learn all this themselves, or would it be more helpful to, for example, bring on someone like you who has a lot more market experience?
I mean, I think it depends on what your goals are. I mean, first of all, you don't know what you don't know until you know it, if that makes any sense. So, oblivion is bliss, you know what I mean? So I think if you're self-aware enough to understand what you're really trying to accomplish with whatever it is you're doing, that should drive directionally how you go forward, right? I couldn't get a PhD if my life depended on it. So I have a lot of respect for these folks that have spent that much time and developed that much, acumen in a particular area. I simply don't have it, and I wouldn't want to do that either. And I think conversely, I think the same goes the other way. Maybe they don't want to be a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's what you have to be a business generalist for the most part. So I think it starts with what are you trying to accomplish? What is your goals? Is your goals to innovate and win a Nobel Prize for a particular scientific discovery, or is it to sell your company to Google or Facebook or insert name Medtronic, Boston, whatever, or are you trying to do something for the betterment of humanity or some combination thereof? I think that should drive what you decide to do, because ultimately if you choose to start a company, much like I'm sure if you choose to go pursue your PhD, you're making a multi-year commitment and almost a permanent career commitment to some extent. And so you really need to think it through, I guess, is what I would say. There's no question that people with a lot of market experience can add value to a company that has none. Just much like if you're a business guy and you have no technical team, you're not going to sell much because you don't have anything you can make. I mean, I can invent like little hand puppets or something, but that's about as far as it goes. So, and I mean, the first venture back deal I did as myself, one of my VC mentors said, make sure you go find a really technical team. You need to have that one or two people that are the best technical people you can find, because you don't know the stuff the level they do, and you need to have it. And it's the same thing they tell technical people is on the other way around. So
That's a really good point. And to add on to that, when you say like, oh, when you were like finding a team, finding technical people, have you ever had in terms of you seeing a need that needs to be changed in the company to like suit the customer more or fit the market, or something that you with your experience thinks must be done? Have you ever had difficulties communicating that to the engineers or like people who are working like much deeper into the science? Like, have you received resistance ever?
yeah, of course, always. I mean, I think engineering technical teams tend to want to test. In general, they want to test things, right? So by nature, they're wired to test and push back. Just like business executives tend to be wired to ask questions to intentionally elicit certain responses or lack of response in certain ways. So I mean, I just learned you just have to modulate it, and you have to, understand that the most important thing is that everyone on the team is headed in the same direction as a team, as a company. That's the job of the CEO, to lead that process. If you do that, if someone comes in out of left field once in a while, it's like, okay, we're all on the same page. Let's just time out here. Let's just back up and remember why we're all here and go back at it that way. And so that happens from time to time. It's happened as long as that dynamic has been around, as long as I've been working, where you have engineering versus non-engineering teams, and it'll probably be there as long after I'm gone too. I think it's the same fundamental thing. It's people you're dealing with, and those people want to be successful. They've learned and think a different way, and so you need to figure out how to make everybody successful, putting them in a position and giving them the tools they need to be successful. And if you do that, you will minimize the amount of friction and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there are hard choices you have to make occasionally, but for the most part, the first strategy works best.
Definitely, and I honestly respect you for now learning to navigate all this for so long, and I think partly that's what makes a company like Diagnostic Biochips work. And I want to take the next few questions to go in more detail about what DBC is focusing on.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little more about some of the benefits of the recently released cloud-based analysis platform, and how you think it would benefit? What is the advantage of it?
So on the and we need to remind you get wisdom. So that's what it is now, by the way. So we build microfabricated probes in two material constructs. One is silicon, the other is polyimide. And there's some polyimide in our silicon probes as well. I'll explain that. So on the silicon side, we have a bunch of different form factors, but they're 128 channel integrated active electronics-based probes. So we actually put the active, in this case Intan, the active analog to digital converter on the actual probe. It's on the PCB that's right next to the probe. And what we focus on is weight, size, and fidelity of recording output. Those are the three big things that we focus on. So typically these are all used for animal research, and maybe some other cool organoid type stuff later on. But for the time being, let's say animal research. You have small animals that are not very big, not very heavy, not very strong, and so on. So it's really important to have a lightweight device. With the integrated chip on it, it's one connector now, not 5 or 6 in between the device, and the probe and the head stage, let's say. The quality, because now you're talking very small animals and medium size, and even primates for that matter. The brain structures are not very big. So, you need to have a high quality recording device picking up all that analog traffic, and the quality of the receiving signals you get back determine how good the output is on the computer, on the back end of it. So you can see two probes in the same place, and one probe sees 150 unique neurons, and the other one only sees 50. That's because there's garbage somewhere in the connection process, most likely. So that's kind of so those are the big sort of focus areas. And then we've taken that over to the polyimide side with what we call our deep array products. And that allows us to get into deep brain structures, like in primates, for example, where you can get into the subthalamic nucleus, and you can look at the substantia nigra and all these kind of places are way, way up in the back of the brain, and very small. I think the STN, someone told me, was between 5 and 7 millimeters in diameter. So these are not big things. Targeting them and being very careful, and also in minimizing the amount of brain damage or brain tissue damage is important. So those are kind of our mainstays. And then on the back end, the cloud stuff originally, it's a work in progress, because this community hasn't really used this stuff before. So they're learning it. We're learning with them as we go through it. But I think what I saw when I started was the ridiculous amount of work, time, and effort researchers were spending running all these tools and managing them themselves. to try and get spike sorting, for example. And so what we did early on was just put some basic simplification functionality in there and then automated it. So like all the settings for your probe settings, your electrode sites, your noise settings and all that are you can do from the software. You can run the reporting program just by literally picking the probe and turning it on, collect all the data, download it all. Now you can run automated spike sorting and curation, which typically is a completely manual process. We're actually using open source software. We're using Kilosort, and then we've automated to scale. So it's tools they're already using. It's just now all you have to do is log into a browser. You don't have to go buy a server and storage and load software and deal with all that, all that craziness. You can just go and focus on your research or what have you. And I think over time you're going to see that evolve with some basic AI functionality, just to tune algorithms for spike sorting and to tune curation. So it's, as you probably know, curation of single neurons is a lot of personal input to it, right? So customer X, person one, does it a very different way than customer X, person two. And so if you can refine the algorithms for curation by having them do it repeatedly, then it basically looks like they did it themselves. So you're not getting this sort of generic output, which is kind of what generative AI is in basic terms anyway. Those are the big things we've done thus far. There's some other things that we're looking at, but those are the two. So we build it up in Kubernetes, it's up on running in containers and doing distributed Kubernetes and all that cloud stuff that you would expect, and so on.
I have a follow-up. Thank you for explaining. I have just a specific follow-up about this like software system that you're building. Do I understand? So does that mean that the company is having to hire experts in all these like data science and like data processing in order to find the right algorithms to incorporate into your platform?
Yes and no. So the platform side, and this is fairly common, we outsource the first product MVP, minimum value product. We outsource that to a third party for the first year or two, and they can throw a bunch of people at it somewhere else in the world. Our team happened to be in Italy. Get you the MVP up and running, but you can stay focused on talking to customers and iterating and all that, as opposed to like running engineering meetings all day every day. And I think that's served us pretty well. That gave us the basic static stuff that we needed to get started. So you take Kilosort, you put it on a container, you run it on one container, and you figure how you scale it to 10 containers, and what resources you're going to apply to it. Then there's some things you have to fix and so, but that's general computer science stuff. So it's not, you don't have to be a neuroscientist. You need to have someone at least looking over your shoulder that might have some neuro experience, so you can make sure that what goes in comes out, so that you're not like, you put in a banana and out comes an orange. You don't know, you think they're both bananas. That's not helpful. Yeah, but the basic stuff is pretty straightforward. Once you get into the more detailed work, like the starting machine learning algorithm development for a file of neuron spikes, then you need to probably have some data science expertise in there and neuroscience expertise, or preferably both, so you can do it properly and you understand what you're getting, because that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. What we have done, and I think we'll continue to do this to the extent we can, is we have made and will make the platform available to innovators that want to come in and do these things for their own purposes and for the community at large. So we had a guy at Tel Aviv University who actually Lior, I can't remember what Lior's last name is, but and he came in and wrote a bunch of the original machine learning stuff, and we plugged it into the system. So I think what we've seen in other industries, and especially the internet, will happen here, which is distributed computing, distributed file structures, distributed databases, third-party API development capability, all that kind of stuff. You can't do everything yourself. This space is way too big, way too hard, and if you can get all these people collaborating, you're going to get a lot farther, a lot faster than you would the other way around. not, I mean, think about like the genome when they decoded the first genome out of, it was here in Maryland and at NIH, also in Maryland. Then you unleash it to everybody that wants to do, epigenetic coding, CRISPR stuff, gene decoding for 23andMe type stuff or whatever. So I think I would love to see neuro go the same way, but we'll see.
That sounds very exciting. So I think definitely like a platform like this will for sure accelerate a lot of work done in this area, like save a lot of unnecessary busy work. And I think I'm very excited to see where that is headed. We talked a little bit more about this branch of the company, and I'm curious about how you see the company kind of contributing and fitting in to and contribute to the field in general with these two paths that you're walking.
So that's a good question. So if you fast forward kind of like where that's part of like I think where we're going. So the first baseline thing is you can't build a data analysis system if you don't know how to get the data yourself. Hence the reason why and I've been through that in past lives and other domains, and it's really important to get the data. So that's why you have to have pros. You need to be able to get the data out yourself, and then you go do something with it. And so we did those two things. So now we have data, we have a platform. I think it's very important that we start to get directly involved in particular disease areas. And we actually have a couple ERB based clinical human, not clinical, a couple ERB based human trials that are starting up. One is very specific to epilepsy, and the other is very specific to Parkinson's. And I think another thing from a business perspective that's really important is you need to be very clear on what problem you're solving. And I think when you get into neuro, it gets convoluted very quickly because there's a lot of things to choose from, and some of those things use the same platform tools, but they're very specific to that particular disease category. That's an area we're going to invest a lot of time and energy in going forward. Now that I think we sort of at least built a base foundation, now we need to go say, okay, let's go find the top 20 Parkinson's guys in the world and get involved and help them understand how to use EFIS in their work. We're doing some of that now, but I think that's a big part of where the potential is down the road. And then people around the periphery of that do other things that could be complementary as well. It's just going to be very different than the way people have thought about med tech and neuro for a long time. If I had it my way, which would be horizontally integrated, everyone brings their breast of their stuff to the table, and you just go fast and you make stuff happen. I mean, they did that with COVID. It's been done. It can be done. You just have to be set up to do it, and you have to show people how to do it.
Exactly. That's honestly, I also really hope that you achieve your mission. This sounds incredibly exciting.
Gets me up in
And
the morning.
it's definitely a very good goal to have. And I'm very excited to see what the company and you can bring to the field over the next like 5-10 years. Now I'm going to pass it back to Bob to go over some more like future questions.
Yeah, so I was definitely excited to hear about your team's collaborations and also about some of the future plans. And also, I totally agree with your sentiment that it would be amazing if neuroscience could kind of go the way that things went with, for example, genomics or the pace that things went with COVID, and kind of everybody working together and moving quickly, getting things done and discovering things. And so I hope that your vision that you kind of laid out for us there does come to fruition. And it sounds like DBC is really doing what they can to help drive that forward. So I think the field is lucky to have you guys.
Well, thanks. It's definitely an important project, that's for sure. If you just think about the number of people that are affected by these various diseases and disorders, and I mean it extends into depression and PTSD and pain and brain cancer and a lot of different areas. I can tell you just from the Parkinson's perspective, there's probably 10 million people worldwide roughly that have it, but only 10% of them have DBSs today, for example, deep brain stimulators, and only half are seeing a actual neurologist versus their GP. So it's just there's a lot of stuff to do. And you need to get a lot of people involved to do something this big. It's not as simple as, I'm just going to do it all myself, and then I'm going to just, launch it out there and it'll just magically happen. That's not likely to happen here.
And speaking of getting a lot of people involved, do you have any advice for perhaps students or even mid-career professionals hoping to make the jump and get into the field of neurotech and start working on these problems, using whatever skill set they already have, or even what skill sets would be good for them to gain to make this jump?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is basic, like, first of all, deciding what you want to do and what you want to focus on. And I think it's especially important in neuro because there's so many different avenues you could go down: neurosurgery, neurology, neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience, med tech. It's just like there's a lot of places you could go. So I think it's good to have a sense of direction. Assuming you have that, then I think it sounds kind of funny because talking about the brain, you've got a network of a lot of people. It's the networking effect that I've seen here is unlike, I mean, I've come from industries where we knew everybody knew everybody, but not like this. Everybody is entangled and most of them know each other. So I think networking is very important. The more people you meet, the more intelligence you can create for yourself, and the more value then you can add to other people when you meet them. So I think that's a very important aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds like amazing advice. It's important to find your niche. Once you do, you should start meeting as many people as you can in that space and starting to become part of those networks.
I haven't seen another industry. Maybe they exist in medical. I haven't seen another industry that's as open-minded and friendly and willing to share and introduce and all that stuff as there that I've seen in neuro. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it seems like almost everybody I reach out to in this space is like open to talk and discuss and teach me about what they're working on. And it's been really refreshing and really awesome to be able to see how open everybody is and kind of learn all these new things and talk to all these new people.
Yeah, agreed.
So we talked a little bit about the near future and the future of DBC, but I was wondering if we could zoom out a little bit further and if you could tell us if you have any predictions for the field of neurotechnology over perhaps the next 20 years or so. And I guess both from a zoomed in perspective and focusing on the specific subset of the field that you're working in, as well as also a zoomed out perspective and, what the field at large might look like after that time has passed, and maybe how these changes might even impact society.
Sure, I'll take a whack at it. So I think one category you're going to see a lot of continued growth in is the neuromodulation space. I think that DBS has sort of been the only real hardcore neuromodulator that's been out there, and I think you're going to see a lot of innovation there over the next several years. I also think that the devices that are doing the recording on the recording side of it are going to get smaller and less invasive and so on. So you can get to the point where you can monitor people and some subset of things in virtual real time, and then eventually potentially take action on it. So I think keep an eye on neuromodulation. I think neuromodulation is a big deal. I think it's going to continue to be a big deal. It needs to be intelligently driven. So I still go back to the fact that you've got to have big data. There has to be a movement to get everybody to establish something that they all use. But I think data is ultimately going to give you, and this isn't like browser data. This is bits and bytes and stuff like that, right? More and more data will make it more and more valuable over time. I mean, it's not a coincidence, for example, that Dexcom CEO just announced that they're going to sell a non-prescription based CGM for like half the price, because he wants to get all the people that aren't not necessarily on CGMs by prescription today for diabetics, right? But they may be people that are close to diabetic, or they want to just be more healthy or what have you. So that kind of stuff, metabolites, all that kind of stuff is going on a lot right now, and I think you're gonna see more of it. I think the organoid stuff is going to be a big deal. So you're starting with the stem cells, and then specifically, and from my perspective, specifically the pluripotent stem cells that are then being able to, you can use to curate a organoid, which is a three-dimensional cell structure that's actually live. You can program it genetically; it will actually replicate what's in the medium, and replicate the culture medium in the dish it's in. So you can actually build mini brains that fire neurons and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's early signs are that could be a game changer. It could change pharmaceutical development. It could be very instrumental in the precision medicine space, personalized medicine space over time. And there's no animals, so it's important from a animal safety, animal testing standpoint. And I mean, for example, the FDA has already made an announcement. They already released something that says they would prefer to see organoid testing done versus animals, and so there's some motivations to invest in that area. I think I think the only other thing I can think of that's out there is that I think quantum computing is going to make a massive difference here. I think the device can communicate the same way the compute does. I think it's a different world. So I don't know what exactly that means. I mean, I've tried to study it. It's super complicated, but I think there's a lot there. Certainly from a scale perspective, you will need it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. With all the data we're bringing in. And I totally agree with a lot of those predictions. I think it's exciting times ahead, and hopefully, as these innovations that you were walking us through there start to happen, we start to see this neurotechnology being used for broader indications and getting optimized for the indications that it's already being used on. Should our listeners perhaps contact you for further discussion after the episode? And if so, who should reach out to you? How should they reach out to you? And what sorts of topics should they reach out to you about?
That's a good question. I mean, I try to be as available as I can be. I'm a relatively busy guy. I also have 5 kids, and so I don't have a ton of free time. But I respond to my email, so I would probably suggest that would be the best way to get a hold of me. And I think what I would say in terms of topics or what have you, certainly in the domain of relevance is helpful. But I think be very specific what you want and what you're asking for. I think what isn't helpful for any senior executive is, hey, how are you? I want to connect with you, kind of stuff. No one has time for that, unfortunately. It's not to be mean, it's just you don't have time. So I think people should say, this is just what you did, which is perfect. This is what we're doing, this is what I like to do. Let me know. I mean, it's just so I think if the readers or listeners approach it that way, I always respond to my emails and so on if there's a purpose.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it sounds like you do have a lot going on, and so efficiency is definitely key.
Yeah.
But I think that was all the questions we had for you today. But I just wanted to say I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day to talk to us. We learned a ton. It was really interesting, and we're really excited about GBC, and yeah, it was much appreciated, and I'm really glad we had this conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for reaching out to me. I enjoy talking about what we're up to, so I don't turn down many opportunities to do it. And you seem like you guys are on the right track, so that's great.